So, with that, I am going to turn the floor over to Larry, and let's enjoy, we have restrooms outside, water in the back if you're getting thirsty. Larry Fredrick, the floor is yours.
Good, thanks.
Do you want me to kill the lights a bit?
Yeah,
Okay.
a little bit. I get blinded really easy.
Well, the one that's blinding you is the projector,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
that was getting me anyway.
That one's gonna stay on.
So, if you were here last time, we had a great time. And if you were here last time, I said there was going to be a manuscript with that on the history of the Silver Queen. And that manuscript is now finished and it's been submitted to the museum. So if you want to follow up and do any more research on the Silver Queen yourself, or verify some of those bits and pieces of information, it's now on file with the museum. Until I revise it again, which is a constant thing. So this evening I thought I would start with do early recreation. And early recreation, we're a recreation town, but it's not something new. We've always had recreation. And I've chosen a period of time, 1879 to about 1920. I'm not going to do all the modern ski history or anything that complicated. I like that period of time because it shows a community's recreational activities in several different economic and cultural periods. We have a mining camp. We have a boom town. We have an industrial urban center. We have the bust. We have a depression. And we even have a little bit of World War I. So it shows the recreational activities that could be taking place. I'm going to deal mostly with the outside recreational activities. We'll skip the sporting houses and the gambling halls and that sort of thing. But I thought it would be probably appropriate. Let's see if I can find it. This happens to me every time.
We didn't go to that shoe store.
What's happening?
I'm hitting the arrow.
Let's make sure you're hitting the right arrow.
Am I hitting the right arrow? That arrow?
Yep. Choose
Ah, that arrow. Okay. Well, I probably go forward and back. Oh,
So,
Anna, it walked up again. Okay, there we
so
go.
forward is this down.
Okay.
Backward would be up, okay?
Oh, computers. Skiing. We might as well start with winter recreation. I've used this before. I just use it because I love it. You could write a story. You can use your imagination. This child is obviously participating in an activity that it's not exactly thrilled about. But you can notice that she's not the only person that has been using this trail. And she's not really strapped in, she's just posing. But I do love the mittens. The mittens go clear up to her elbows and her hands are in there somewhere. But then of course she has bare ankles, so she's not too happy. But she is standing not on skis. These are not skis. These are Norwegian snowshoes.
Oh.
This is what we called them back then. Now the web shoes that we now call snowshoes had been used in the 1820s to the 1850s and so forth by a lot of fur trappers. But by the time of the California Gold Rush, people were adapting to what were called Norwegian snowshoes. In the California rush to California in the 1850s, basically, there was a lot of political and economic turmoil in the Norwegian countries. And so there was a lot of immigration. And in Northern California during the Gold Rush, there were a lot of Norwegians. And they did not use the traditional snowshoe that we call a snowshoe. They were using what they used, Nordic skis, but they called them snowshoes. So to them as skis and snowshoes, but these are typically 10 feet long, 12, 14 feet long. They are occasionally, if they're very creative, they'll steam the tips and bend them forward a little bit. But this is an interesting recreation because this is a recreational activity that came from a daily activity, a necessity. If you think about being in the mountains, how do you get around in the wintertime? You need to get supplies, you need to get information, the mail, you need to go from one community, you need to go from your camp to your mine. How do you do it? And this becomes the way. As I said, they started in California. In the 1860s, well, let's go back. Human nature. Whenever you have two humans doing the same activity, there's going to be competition. I don't care what it is. I don't care if you admit it or not, there's competition. By the 1860s, actually, men were competing against each other on these. And in California, they were hitting speeds of 70 miles an hour. What they would do is they would all line up at the top of a hill and go a straight line down and see who survived to the finish line. Usually it was a leather strap nailed on, and then they just laced their boots into it. Or in some cases, they might actually nail a pair of boots into their skis.
Oh, wow.
And then put them on. They had no edges, they had no steering. What they had were these long sticks or poles. Some of them were shaped like a hockey stick, and that was how you skied. So, and they say if you wanted to brake, you put it between your legs and sit down on it. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But this is Norwegian snowshoeing. And this is what it looked like this is a photograph from someplace in Colorado, probably about 1880s. And this is Norwegian snowshoeing. Aspen started in 1879. In 1880 in Gunnison, they were actually having competitions. And they had a competition from Gunnison to one of the mining camps, and the prize was $400.
Wow.
And in 1881, they had a race from Crested Butte to, I believe it was Tin Cup, the mining camp of Tin Cup, and that was only $50. But there was competition. Meanwhile, in Aspen, everybody had snowshoes. They had to. And this is how they got to their camp from their mine, and this is how supplies were brought in. Even in 1879, the winter of 1879-80, B. Clark Wheeler, who came in with Charles Hallam and basically started financing the town by buying the smuggler and setting up the town site. They came in February of that year, and that was a very heavy snow year. And they came on snowshoes. And behind them, they were pulling sleds with supplies. And that's how they got in here, and that's how they got out of here. And we were just discussing a minute ago, before you got here, the first people that spent the time in Ute City, there was another group of miners that spent their time that winter in Hunter Creek. And old Bill had to ski from Hunter Creek over to Leadville to get supplies because they were running out. And it took him, I think he didn't come back for 6 weeks. They thought he had expired. Again, it was necessity. And the mail was delivered this way. The mail route was from Buena Vista over Cottonwood Pass to Pitkin, Tin Cup, over Taylor Pass to Ashcroft, to Aspen, to Leadville, to Buena Vista. And he did it every 7 days. Now, we do have one case, one of the mailmen died in an avalanche. But competition began to start. Oh, and what is interesting is that this was perfectly acceptable for women. One historian remarked that it was considered not too strenuous. And it was not unladylike to be on a pair of skis. And in Aspen, we do have records of groups of families would ski up to Stillwater and have a picnic in the wintertime. And the ladies, if you wanted to get from this side of town to that side of town, it was just as easy to snowshoe or ski.
Do you think wear dresses or pants?
Oh no, dresses. No, we're going to get to split dresses in a moment. But this is a competition. You can see that they're doing a little having fun. This is a widely publicized photo. It's thought to be either at Schofield or at Above Marble in Crystal City. And it's widely used, this is from the Colorado Historical Society. But you can see they're having quite a bit of fun here with the competition. But it becomes a recreation. It's a necessity which becomes recreational, which is the evolution of that sport here. There are other winter activities. Of course, there's ice skating, if you want to go ice skating. Now, the nice thing about, or the difference with ice skating is that this is strictly recreational. This has no necessity, there's no purpose for it except to enjoy. In Aspen, the first mention of ice skates is not until 1884. And a gentleman advertises that he has taken over a lot on Hopkins Avenue, the low lot. I don't know where that was, but he has, 1886, he has placed an electric light on a pole, and he has 60 pairs of ice skates to rent. And then for the succeeding years, he has 60 pairs of ice skates for sale. But ice skating is strictly recreational. This is Stillwater. Oh, I don't know what that is. That happened last time. It'll go away, I hope. But this is up in Stillwater. And those are not hockey sticks. They are probably sticks for balance. But you could buy them, and they were for sale in
Can I just note how wide the river is?
Yeah, Stillwater, and this one's frozen really hard right now. You can see it. This was a very popular. Ice skating was done all around town. Every mud puddle seemed to be an ice skating rink.
Where's Stillwater?
Stillwater is east of town. When you go up Cresta House Hill and then you head past the Aspen Club and
North Star.
North Star. Yeah. Stillwater. Yeah. I keep thinking Fritz Benedict's house, but this is Stillwater, and I think this is backwards because I think that's Shadow Mountain. So flip this backwards. That's a glass plate negative. Let's spin back. This one I just put on here because not everyone used a lot of common sense. You'll notice that it's wide open water. This is a little bit later. I kind of cheated on this one. The reason I put this in is this is Bede Harris. And Bede Harris, if you work in the archives here, you'll find that Bede Harris wrote a lot of his experiences and a lot about Aspen and left us all sorts of bits and pieces of information. He was a school teacher. He taught shop and manual arts, they called it back then. And his hobby was history. And then we recently had Tim Willoughby here. He was a teacher, and his hobby was history. And I used to be a shop teacher, and my hobby is history. So I like Bede Harris. I just think he's cool. So I put him in there just for the heck of it. There were other recreations. I said every place was an ice skating rink. Here's a settling pond down below the Molly Gibson, and you can see the ice skaters.
Oh, yeah.
Now, if you're familiar with town, and you go down East Cooper, and you cross the river to go to Mountain Valley. As you go up, there's some affordable housing on the right-hand side. That was actually a pond. That was Sullivan's Pond. They called it Sully's Pond. And the children from the east side of town would ice skate over there. And the children around here would ice skate over here by the line. But it was quite a popular recreational sport back then. And we don't have that much today. Do they still do the ice rink downtown? I haven't been on Durant for...
Well, this is, yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, by the CP
So,
center.
yeah.
there are other recreations in the wintertime. The children had their recreation, sledding, and sledding was quite popular. Oftentimes, they would have a much larger sled, and the children would either attach a dog to pull them around, but more likely they would take a burro. There were burros around town. Burros are small donkeys. They're very domesticated and very friendly. And they would attach a burro and pull themselves around town. The adults also did skating or sledding. They would get in carriages, horse-drawn carriages, and sleigh ride around town. And they were called tally-hoes. And if you had a tally-ho, it would be in the gossip column in the paper. So-and-so had a tally-ho. And they were very popular during the holidays. You would go through town singing Christmas carols.
And the little girl on the right is checking her phone messages.
There were, I did say, one of the indoor activities which was popular in the wintertime, other than sporting ladies and gambling, was bowling. I wanted to mention that. The city of Aspen in 1880 actually had an ordinance on licensing fees, and they would license, it was illegal, but they licensed houses of ill fame, they licensed those inmates, they licensed the gambling halls, and they licensed the gambling devices. The city needed cash, they didn't have cash. But they passed an ordinance, and it included pool tables and bowling alleys, which seemed odd in 1880, and that was in May. In November of 1880, Mr. Pierce built a bowling alley. And we had bowling. It was in a pool hall and bowling. And Mr. Pierce's bowling alley lasted for a couple of decades. It was a very popular bowling alley. There was actually a bowling alley in one of the large boarding houses in Turtle Rock Park. We had 4 or 5 bowling alleys. Now, we're not talking 16 lanes, we're talking a bowling alley. But it was a winter recreation, which I thought was rather unusual.
Was it outdoors or indoors?
They were indoors, yeah, they were indoors. Yeah, Pierce's, it doesn't say, we have a photograph of Pierce's building, and it doesn't say pool or billiards or bowling. It says whiskey. Well, let's move on to summer. The national pastime in the 1880s is baseball. It has been going since the 1860s. By 1876, there's a national baseball league. Baseball is everywhere. Now, 1880, Aspen is a camp in the wilderness. There's nothing here. You would think that you would be spending most of your time trying to survive. Let's cut wood, let's go hunt, let's get supplies, let's build a mine, let's try to get rich. They had baseball teams. In 1881, when we finally started publishing the newspaper remarks that there are teams playing. It's spring, it's time for the teams to get out. The way they worded it almost sounds as if it's been going on even previous to that. Now, it's not organized. It's strictly recreational. You get a group together and somebody else gets a group together and you play a friendly game of sandlot baseball. It gets rather silly because They will have a game, and the newspaper will report. We got a game together between the Fats and the Slims. Mr. Tibbetts Hotel got a group together, and they played the lawyers. It was whoever would get together. Well, we had plenty of lawyers. We could have but baseball is a big thing, and it's strictly recreational at this point. And for the first many years, it's the 4th of July, 1882, I think it was, 1883, the 4th of July in Ashcroft, they had a baseball game between Aspen and Ashcroft. And they just grabbed 9 players from Aspen who wanted to play, and a bunch got together in Ashcroft, and they had a great time. It hit all the papers, everybody knew about it. And they would just play among themselves. Eventually, it evolved. By 1889, we had railroads, we had a huge population. We had grown in 1886, was our biggest growth year. In 1889, Charles Hallam donated 160 building lots to build a horse track and baseball field. This is the Meadows. There's still remnants of the racetrack out there that they did not disturb. But Hallam's addition was 120 acres on the north side of the town site, and Hallam Lake, Hallam Addition, all of this over there is part of that. And in 1889, the citizens got together, a group of investors, and they convinced Hallam to go ahead and donate those 160 lots. Extremely controversial. People were outraged that this was more important than building affordable housing. We could put 160 houses on that lot, and we need housing critically. So, just to let you know. As many as 3,000 people would show up. It was really quite incredible. And what happened with this field was, I told you it was a horse racing track as well. And there were too many conflicts. Horse racing was practically as popular in Aspen as baseball. So when you wanted to play a baseball game, no, you can't do it, we got a horse race. You want a horse race? No, we can't do it, we got a baseball. So a second field was built, and that second field was built right over here on the Holden Road property. So when you come in at the cemetery light, that field over there, that was this baseball field. And they even built more stadiums. There were complaints whenever there was a baseball game about profanity and alcohol. And the city actually did, in one city council meeting, charged the city marshal. His duty was to make sure that that was under control at the baseball games. But what has happened in both of these instances is once the railroads came and we had a high population, this is no longer a recreational sport for just people to get together. Now we have teams, specific teams, and they're almost semi-professional. Whenever Glenville comes to play, we complain because they put professionals in their team, usually the pitcher. But we're doing the same thing. But there is a lot of competition because now we are playing other towns. We're playing Leadville, we're playing Glenwood, we're playing Grand Junction. And there is a Colorado Baseball Association at that time. Colorado Springs, Denver, the whole group.
What year was that? What year?
Well, the first stadium was built in 1889, and this one I'm not exactly sure. It looks like 1891.
Larry, did this one also have a racetrack, or was it
No,
just
no, this
one
was strictly
that-
baseball. Um, Women play baseball,
Right on.
and it was quite popular. This is 1910. These are the Bloomer Girls. And there were Bloomer Girl teams throughout the country. We're not sure if this is the Bloomer Girls or not. It may be because it appears that they are all women. A lot of the women's teams had one or two men who would wear wigs. I have no idea why. I do know that the Bloomer Girls did a tour, and they were here in June of 1910, and was quite successful. The Bloomer Girls team, as I recall, they played 70 games in 60 days. They played 3 consecutive games on the 4th of July in the Midwest, each in a different town. So they were in quite demand. So we had visiting teams. We still had local teams. My favorite one, the RHS baseball team, the Roundhouse Sluggers. We had a roundhouse in Aspen, down where the post office is today, between Clark's Market and the post office where the mailboxes are. Years ago, you could still see the remnants of that roundhouse, but the city put in pipes and bike paths and so forth, so you could see them. But I mean, would you play baseball against those guys? But they were the Roundhouse Sluggers. So we did have local teams, and they enjoyed it quite a bit. Eventually, the high school had a team, and they were, I don't have the records of them. I didn't look into them. But we do have the records, I just didn't follow them. And then in 1914, here's a Sandlot game out on the edge of 8th Street. Just a pickup game. And this is dated July 5th. So the day after the big game, they did that. Bicycle race. The other activity. In the 1880s, around the middle of the 1880s, the safety bike came out. The wheels were the same size, and we had solid tires, and then eventually pneumatic tires. This became incredibly popular. There were bicycle clubs throughout Colorado. Denver built 50 miles of bicycle trails in the 1880s. There were century clubs. A century club was, you took off on the weekend, you might go from Denver on the train, you'd go to Colorado Springs, then you'd ride 100 miles back. And these were incredibly popular. At one time, Denver had 25,000 wheelmen and wheelwomen.
That's interesting.
Aspen would have 1 bicycle for every 10 residents. It was extremely popular, and now we have the split dress.
Is that black guy the guy that's on the cover of one of the history books? that the same man?
No, the black guy?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, this is,
That's Hannibal Brown.
that's Hannibal Brown.
Yeah.
And this is about 1914, I believe. This is Hannibal Brown. This fellow, I can give you his name. Oh man, let's see. I believe this is Bixby, I'm not sure. Blaine Bray, 1914. This is a race which became incredibly popular. In the fall, Glenwood would have a fall festival, sports festival. And teams from around the country, or around the region, would come and play baseball, football, and they would have bike races. The bike race started at Basalt, and they ran along the Midland Railroad track down to Glenwood. So a train would come from Grand Junction, A train would come from Leadville, they would assemble the teams, they would then, the audience, the fans would get in the train, and the riders would ride to Glenwood, and the train would follow alongside. And then when they got just outside of Glenwood, they would speed up the train, everybody would run to the finish line and cheer on. This was quite a competition, $400 to the winner.
Wow.
Big, this was a big deal. Yeah, Hannibal Brown was there. This lasted from about 1900 to about 1914 to 1918 or so. In fact, if you look here, this is part of the crowd assembling. If you're familiar with the Salt, that's Snowmass Canyon. This is the train track, and people are getting ready. This is a big deal. Here's another one which I find kind of interesting. This is probably just slightly later than 1918 because this appears to be the railroad bed and there are no rails. So the Midland has pulled its rails out. But notice right here, we have an automobile. So, in fact, the automobile will begin to take over. But again, women were allowed to do this. This was women, children, men, and it was quite a recreation thing to ride your bicycles. I just put that in because I like it. Definitely post. I'm not sure how, it looks like they're strapped in there somehow. It doesn't fall over. I said horse racing was popular. This is that baseball field. The stadium, the seating is over on this side. This is the race tower, and you can see they're getting ready for a race. Quite a competition. For such an early photograph, an action shot, it's good quality. They also had, what are these called? Sullies, I think they're called, something like this. This is probably, one of these gentlemen is probably Jack Atkinson, Three-Fingered Jack. He was noted for his racing these little carts, and he was quite good at it. Three-Fingered Jack is one of our characters prominent in Aspen. Well, that was about to change. We started having automobile races. Let me explain, let me look this up. I want to explain what is going on here. This is a refreshment race. This race is 1916 on the 4th of July. The first quarter mile you race, stop, and drink a lemonade. You go to the half-mile point and you eat a blueberry pie. You go to the three-quarter mark and you have another lemonade. And the winner was Miss Marion Brunton of the Brunton family. So the ladies were driving. So that's just, yeah. What do you say? They were creative, they were having fun. This was after the crash. This is the beginning of a depression, and yet people still managed to find recreation in however they wanted.
That's called touring cars?
Yeah, these are touring cars. Yeah, I don't know what these are. I can't tell what they are. No, I can't tell what they are. There's other competitions. I thought I'd throw this in because I like the fire department. This is a competition which is an exclusive type of recreation. The fire companies, of course, had competitions between people, their hose carts and their ladder companies. And we've talked about that before, but I just thought I'd throw that in. Very popular. We had state champions. They were timed. What you did, this is a hose cart, so you would run a specific distance, you would hook up to the fire hydrant, and then you would unravel the hose to a specific point, and you would time. The ladder wagon was a long wagon, 4 wheels. It had ladders, buckets, axes, and they would also pull that, and they would go down a couple of blocks. They would stop, they would have to get the ladders out, they'd have to put the ladder up to a specific window, and in that window there was a bell. And so they would have to run up and hit the bell, and they were timed on that as well. And it's min, because it's easier to hook the min up faster than trying to attach the horses. Well, I had to put something mining in, right? This is another one of those occupations that becomes somewhat recreational. In the mines, you have a hammer and you have a drill. And even though we have hydraulic drills and jacks in our mines in Aspen in the 1880s and 90s, primarily it's done by hand. 2 men working together is called double jacking. 1 man with a hammer and a drill is called single jacking. Well, as I said, whenever you have someone working alongside someone else, there's competition. And we had drilling competitions. This is down by Howland Lake. You can see the hill up here, Howland Lake. This is a 4th of July. They have brought in a massive granite rock. And we have double jacking. We have 1 man with the heavy hammer, 1 man holding the drill, and judges. And this guy is timing it, and this guy is making sure that they're not doing something wrong. Each time this is struck, the man with the drill will turn it slightly, and that helps make the hole straight. 4-pound hammer, 3/4 inch diameter drill, about the diameter of your thumb. 6 to 8 pound hammer was used for the double jacking, and that was a 7/8 inch, almost an inch in diameter. Let me get you some numbers. Double jacking could achieve a hole of 32 inches to 3 feet in 15 minutes. Wow. Incredible speed. Incredible speed. In Howland Lake, in this particular instance, there were 12 men competing for a $100 purse. And the 2 teams that had the fastest time tied. It was a tie. There are other more or less violent sports. Tennis. This is where the yellow brick school is today. This was the Lincoln School, and this is where I think there's like a little basketball court right there today. And this is Miss Lillian. What is her name? I love her. Miss Lola Adams, and she's demonstrating the art of tennis. The high school had a team. They had 32 people show up for their tennis team in 1908. This is a different tennis field. This is behind what is today the red brick school, just to this side. This was next to the high school. The D.R.C. Brown Mansion had been turned into a high school, and this was the high school tennis court. And both men and women competed in that. During the quiet time, about 1900, football became quite popular. Football was interesting because it was not considered a sport for adults. This was for high school students. This was a game that was not widely accepted to begin with by adults. This is the 1902 football team in Paonia, Colorado, on a field trip. Quite an impressive team, I think. I don't know, he's carrying extra jackets, I don't know.
Is that an orchard behind?
Hmm?
Is that an apple orchard or something?
Yeah, 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 you can see the whole area. Great apples. Again, they were the champions in 1909. In 1906, the team played Leadville, and it was snowing so hard that they finally stopped the game. Aspen won that game 78-0. I thought that was pretty sick. 1908, the team before this team, they had a hard time. It was reported that ignorance in the game was shown in all quarters. The coach's services were invaluable, but on account of his professional duties, he could not be with the team as often as was really necessary. Positions were self-appointed, and in some cases, probably not to the best advantage. I love the way the newspapers write. Yeah. However, Aspen, the 1908 team, they did go to Glenwood to play, and Glenwood had an even more dismal team. And they did show up, and they played, and Aspen won that game 6-0. And the Glenwood papers were elated. That's such a great showing by the losing team. They thought that was great, that their team was really starting to get moving. There was a little bit of a grudge between Glenwood and Aspen by 1908 when that game took place, because in 1906, Aspen went to play Glenwood, and they had used some of the new rules. The forward pass. And Glenwood had never seen it and didn't know what to do with it. And they lost that game 62-0. So there was high school rivalry even at the turn of the other century. Basketball started, and we had basketball. Basketball became quite popular. It's interesting because things were a little different in one particular instance. The basketball team was supposed to play against Grand Junction, and there was a miscommunication, and Grand Junction canceled the game. Well, the team said, well, we still want to play another game, so the firemen in town got together and put together a team and played against the high school students. And this was not unusual for them to play against adult teams. Incidentally, they won 31-30. Not the high school students. Yeah. And also in one occasion, one football game I forgot to mention, the same thing happened. The football team was short a game, so they played high school alumni. And it was said that this was unfair because the alumni had a weight advantage, a considerable weight advantage. But the high school team won that one also. Perhaps there was some sportsmanship. Women play basketball? Peggy Rowland, if you remember Peggy Rowland, she's a couple of decades after this, but she played. They did not, I understand the women played a little different. They did not, they played zone, 3 zones of basketball. But that's the competition. And they hit their letter too. This is the outside of the high school building, the old DRC mansion. Well, I thought I'd finish up with recreation centers. We have a recreation center. Most cities today have a recreation center, and they're publicly funded. Aspen's early recreation center was not publicly funded. Aspen's early recreation center was Hallam Lake. Hallam Lake was owned by Charles Hallam, and originally, as part of, he claimed all of his land as a ranch. Originally, he used the lake as a private fishing club, and he and several of his friends would fish, and they would actually stock the lake. And they would stock the lake with trout that the state would give them. One year they stocked it with 25,000 trout. But that was a coordinated effort because they would then take those trout and take them up to Taggart Lake. And Taggart Lake was actually a fish hatchery for a brief period until the operator was indicted. But that's another story. We'll talk about that at some point. Hallam Lake, we had an ice house, we had a recreation house, a recreation center. There were bicycle races around the lake, there were foot running races around the lake, there were boats to rent. And there was also, these ladies were on a raft, it just looks so dangerous. This gentleman is just sort of shaking his head. But this was a popular place. This is where you had picnics, this is where you went on moonlight boat cruises on the lake. This was an ice facility. This is where you collected ice for the ice house, for ice in the summertime. Incredibly popular, including this amazing chute. This was on the top of the hill, and you could get in a toboggan, and you could slide down and go down and splash into it. Now, remember the skiing? There was a competition, there was an offer, the first skier to ski down this in the middle of wintertime and make it down alive, they give him $50. I don't have a record of anybody accomplishing that.
How long was this rec center?
The what?
How long was this rec center in operation?
Until about 1910 or so. When did D.R.C. Brown's first wife? Oh no, she passed away.
1898.
Yeah, 1898. So after about 1898, it started to fall apart. No, he didn't buy it until 1918. Yeah. And I'll leave you with this one. Talk about innovative. This is a steam-powered boat on Hallam Lake.
Wow. Oh my God.
I pulled this years ago for Carl, because Carl was our steam guy. But there's nothing we haven't tried in Aspen as far as recreation and enjoying. But that was our first recreation center. Hallam Lake. And let me see if I can find you. When did Hallam Lake fall apart? It got very confusing because it had been abandoned, and then D.R.C. Brown bought it for back taxes.
The rec center, you mean?
Yeah. I call it a rec center, and it wasn't. It was just the Hallam Lake. Yeah, I dried it out in 1890 and cleaned it up. In 1930, Jim Caparello caught a 9-pound trout in there. So, DRC would have been upset because that was his lake. And then that was donated to ACES back in the 60s. So,
Pepsi, wasn't it?
Elizabeth Peck.
yeah, it was, she did. Because they had bought the property. So, darling lady, loved her. She was a cool lady. So anyway, that's sort of a quick synopsis of early recreation. We had recreation very similar to what we have today. Some of the same sports, some of the same activities. Yes?
So this is all the outdoor stuff, because they had the rink also, right?
Yeah, there was the Rink Opera House, which was a roller skating rink. That was behind where the Prospector Lodge is today in Wagner Park. It was right behind the Prospector Lodge. It was an opera house. If they had entertainment, they stopped the roller skating and they put out seats, and whoever was in town came and did their little skit, and the next day it was a roller skating rink. So the Rink Opera House is one of our, there were a lot of indoor recreational activities. I mean, we had the Opera House, the Wheeler Opera House, and we had Tudor's Kamike, which was Mr. Tudor and his wife, and I think if you bought a drink at the bar, it was free to go into the stage. But yeah, we had a lot of other types of recreation. But these are the more traditional ones that you're more accustomed to. And like I said, bowling, I thought that was quite interesting. I had forgotten that they had bowling there, it was that popular.
Did they ever swim in Helen Lake or no?
Oh, yeah. Not during this period of time, but once it had been abandoned, there was a caretaker, and there was actually a notice in the paper to the young boys in town who have decided to skinny dip. And this is not an appropriate place to do that. And the sheriff is going to be looking for you. It doesn't seem to have detracted at all from that. Swimming was not a popular recreation. About as adventuresome as people got was a picnic. They would go out and do a picnic next to the lake and do fishing. I left out the fishing and the hunting. I left out boxing. Boxing was another, indoor and outdoor. We actually had a rink. One 4th of July, they set up a ring, whatever you call it, a ring, and they had a boxing match in the town. So boxing was another recreation, but that was more of a men's only situation. This is more general public type of recreation. So there were quite a few other. Hunting, I suppose, would be a recreation for some. Survival for men.
Yeah.
But not, I don't care for pictures of dead animals lying in the I left that point out. I'm as biased as anybody else.
Were there ever any sort of like lumberjack competitions? You mentioned the bit about the single jack, double jack for the mining, but I'm just curious, like sawing a log or chopping.
I don't have any record. I don't have any record of any lumber mill competitions, and we had plenty of lumber mills.
Yeah.
They were very industrial. I mean, all of the forest you see today is replacement forest. This forest was gone. I think we had 6 lumber mills running at the same time. We had three up Woody Creek. We had 4 or 5 operations up Hunter Creek. Up near Difficult, there was an operation. So, no, that's interesting. I have no record of any lumberjack competitions at all.
How about rodeo riding or
No, rodeo is a modern.
it's more modern?
Yeah, it's turn of the century. It's Buffalo Bill Cody.
Right.
Yeah, the rodeo existed, but it wasn't called a rodeo. It was called ranching.
Okay.
Yeah, it was ranching and separating the steers and that sort of thing.
But I like your idea of that anytime, it comes out of the workplace, like the lumberjacking thing, the rodeo comes out of, and the drill competition comes out of.
There's going to be competition,
It's very
and some of these, like football, just comes out of nowhere. Basketball just comes out of nowhere, and becomes a true recreation, just for the sake of recreation. The same with ice skating, but many of our recreations came from day-to-day work. Skiing was a necessity. It wasn't a recreational sport. It was a necessity. And the same, it's very common to have. We are a competitive. It's a human genome, I guess.
Yeah, because there are native recreation games that involve
Yeah.
balls and sticks.
I will be back in March. I do my event now with Durant Avenue. I just started going through the photographs. I have narrowed my selection down to 178 photographs. I will try to narrow it down to about 30 and have an interesting talk for you. Next
And
month.
that'll actually be March 19th,
Oh,
which
it's
is
March
Thursday.
19th?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Oh, wait a
Thursday,
minute,
March
isn't-
19th, and if anybody
Oh, wait,
needs,
isn't that when Vanderbish is here?
he's here that evening, yep.
Oh, he's there now, oh, so I'm.
So you'll be from 3 to 4, and then he speaks at 5:30.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to crash that, I've got all this book.
I have cards that have all of these dates, because, I mean, we can't keep them straight now. I can't keep them straight. So we wrote them down. So I've got cards for anybody that wants to pick up some of our programming. We do have a fun retro film series that I kind of left out as well. We're showing new films this year, so if you've come to see them in the past, they are new and exciting this year. We've got a couple of those coming up still in April, March and April, all right? Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. I like the fact that baseball was 2 words. I
Yes,
saw
it
that
was.
too.
Yes, it was. Baseball originally was 2 words. Yeah.
Which makes sense.
The rules were very different as well. Some of the games were played, so it was a certain sport. And then they would-
Absolutely. There you go. David, I'll have these up here.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.